The kitchen in apartment 3B was too small for a man of Elijah Reed's ambition, but it was for this moment warm. The air was thick with the sharp, salty smell of sizzling bacon. Elijah Precise, at 32 years old, commanded the tiny space with an accountant's logic. He wore a crisp white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, but his focus was absolute. He was a man who lived by numbers, and the kitchen was his first audit of the day. The bacon was transferred to a paper towel, a perfect 7-minute fry. The pancake batter, measured to the gram, was poured into 3 identical circles in the hot pan. Aaliyah, 11 years old and all sharp angles and bright eyes, sat at the small formica table. Her bare feet dangled, kicking a silent rhythm against the chair leg. "I can smell the calculations from here, Dad," she said. Elijah smiled, not turning from the stove. "Efficiency star, that's the key." He slid the plate in front of her. 3 perfect pancakes, 2 strips of bacon, a precise triangle of scrambled eggs. "All right. Morning briefing. What is the plan for world domination today?" This was their ritual. It was the anchor of their morning. Aaliyah took a serious bite of pancake, chewing slowly as she considered the question. "The human brain generates about 23 watts of power when you're awake." Elijah raised an eyebrow, finally sitting across from her with his own plate. "That's it. I feel like my utility bill says I'm generating more." "That's enough to power a small light bulb," Aaliyah continued, ignoring his joke with the dedication of a serious scientist. "So, technically, I am the light of your life." Elijah laughed, a real warm sound that filled the small room. He sat opposite her, but he didn't eat. He just watched her. He saw the quick, relentless intelligence in her eyes, the way her mind worked. 23 watts. His own mind was burning hotter. He glanced past her toward the refrigerator. It wasn't the colorful, misspelled magnets he saw. It was the stack of envelopes tucked behind one of them. The light bill stark white. The gas bill pale blue. The final notice from the auto lender an angry red. The numbers swam in his head, a hostile arithmetic. $600 short. Again. A wave of cold, quiet shame washed over him. This apartment, with its peeling paint and rattling radiator, felt less like a home and more like a holding cell. Aaliyah deserved sprawling green lawns. She deserved a bedroom that wasn't also a storage closet. She deserved a future built on a foundation stronger than his next paycheck. This meticulous, suffocating poverty was a cage, and he was failing to pick the lock. He was 32 years old. He felt 50. Aaliyah saw the shift. She always did. His eyes went flat. He was calculating again, but the bad kind. The fridge math kind. She stopped talking about the watts. She was only 6 years old when her mother Lena had disappeared from their lives, taken by a sickness that Aaliyah only understood as a sudden, terrible silence. Her memories of her mother were fractured. They were not solid things. They were like the smell of lavender or the specific yellow of a sundress, or a laugh that sounded like distant wind chimes. They were pretty, but they were not useful. Her father was useful. Her father was solid. She remembered the nights after the long, quiet nights. She remembered his large, warm hand holding hers. She remembered his voice, rough with grief, forcing its way through Goodnight Moon for the 100th time. He had never missed a parent-teacher conference. He had never missed a meal. He had tried to be the sun and the moon for her. Aaliyah knew with the certainty only an 11-year-old can possess that her father was the best man in the world. He just looked so tired. A sharp buzz vibrated across the counter. It was not the alarm. It was his phone. Elijah's focus snapped back to the present. The fatigue evaporated. He picked up the device, his thumb hovering over the screen. A new energy lit his face, a sharp electric hope that pushed the exhaustion away. "Well," he said, his voice suddenly lighter. "Speak of a miracle." He turned the screen toward her. A calendar notification. 10 a.m. meeting. Silas Thorne. "Today is the day, Aaliyah Star," he said, and for the first time that morning, his smile reached his eyes. "This is the one. I have my meeting with Mr. Thorne, and after this, everything changes." It had been 6 weeks. 6 weeks since the day the trajectory of Elijah Reed's life had been fundamentally altered. He had been in the bullpen at Franklin & Associates, a gray, sprawling room that smelled of burnt coffee and quiet desperation. Elijah was invisible there, just one of 40 accountants laboring under poor fluorescent lighting. He was auditing shipping manifests for a logistics company, a job so beneath his capabilities that performing it felt like a physical act of erosion. The disruption had come at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The heavy glass doors to the senior partner's suite opened and Silas Thorne emerged. Silas Thorne, at 50 years old, was not merely wealthy. He was a performance of wealth. He was a real estate mogul who moved with the gravitational pull of a politician. His suit was a sharkskin gray that seemed to absorb the room's meager light. He was laughing a booming, practiced sound that caused the relentless tapping of keyboards to pause. Elijah's boss, Mr. Franklin, hurried beside him, nodding nervously. As they passed Elijah's cubicle, Silas stopped. He stopped so abruptly that Franklin nearly collided with him. The entire bullpen held its breath. Silas Thorne was not looking at Franklin. He was looking at Elijah's monitor. Elijah froze. His blood turned to ice. On his screen was not just the mind-numbing manifest. Open in a separate window was a macro he had built during his lunch break, a complex algorithm that cross-referenced the client's shipping routes against fluctuating fuel futures to predict scheduling conflicts. It was complex, elegant, and deeply unauthorized. "What is that?" Silas asked. His voice was smooth like polished dark wood. Elijah's throat was dry. "It is just a projection model, sir, for the client's logistics." Silas ignored him, his gaze fixed on the screen. He turned to Franklin. "Is this what you have him doing data entry?" "Read," Franklin said, his voice squeaking. "He is one of our junior accountants, Mr. Thorne, a good number cruncher." Silas Thorne finally turned his eyes on Elijah. It was the first time any real power had ever looked directly at him. Thorne stepped fully into the cubicle, bringing with him the scent of expensive cologne and leather. Elijah saw the details up close. The man's smile was a brilliant, engineered white so perfect it was unsettling. It did not reach his eyes, which were a cold, assessing gray. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch gleamed, a machine worth more than Elijah's car and salary combined. His shoes were dark alligator leather, shining like obsidian. Thorne looked from the screen to Elijah, and the smile became genuine. It was the look of a collector finding a rare piece in a junk shop. "Franklin, you are a fool," Silas said lightly. He focused his full, undivided attention on Elijah. "A man with a chief financial officer's brain, and you have him laboring as a secretary." Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. It was a jolt of validation so sudden and intense it felt like a physical blow. He sees me. All the years of night school, all the certifications he'd studied for while Aaliyah slept, all of it recognized by this titan in 10 seconds. Silas Thorne held out a business card. It was thick, heavy, the black ink embossed. "My assistant will contact you. I am launching a new venture, a private equity fund for urban renewal. I need a new partner, not an employee, a partner, someone trustworthy to manage the finances from the ground up." He tapped the screen displaying Elijah's algorithm. "I need someone who sees the entire board, Mr. Reed, not just the next move. You see the board." That had been 6 weeks ago. The 10 o'clock meeting this morning had been the final seal. The apartment door opened at 6:35 in the evening. Aaliyah looked up from her math homework. Elijah stood in the doorway, still wearing his one good navy suit, but his tie was pulled loose. He looked, Aaliyah thought, exhausted, but he was lit from within. He seemed to be vibrating with an energy that made the small apartment feel even smaller. "So," Aaliyah prompted, her pencil hovering, "did you dominate the world?" Elijah did not speak for a long moment. He dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. He walked into the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and looked at his daughter. A slow, massive smile, one she had not seen in years, spread across his face. "He said yes." Elijah whispered the words, heavy with disbelief. "He said yes to what?" "The job." "He said yes to us." He moved fast, crossing the room and lifting Aaliyah from her chair, spinning her in the air. Aaliyah shrieked a sound of pure joy. "Dad, what are you talking about?" He set her down, his hands gripping her shoulders, his eyes shining. "He is not just hiring me, Star. He is making me a partner, a 50-50 partner." The words felt huge, sacred. Partner. It was the key to the cage. It was the escape route. The red-bordered envelopes on the fridge suddenly looked small, insignificant. 50-50. Aaliyah knew her fractions. "That is a lot. That is half." "It is," Elijah said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not hide. "He is investing the startup capital, $50,000. Aaliyah's eyes went wide. $50,000. It was an impossible number, a number from television, not from their lives. $50,000, Elijah repeated, tasting the sound of it. It was the sound of safety. It is all happening, Aaliyah. Everything I promised. A new house, a better school, college paid for, anything you want. Aaliyah processed this torrent of information. She processed the new house, the better school in the future. She focused on the most immediate critical implication. Does this mean, she asked, her voice hushed with hope, we can get the good pizza from Giordano's? Elijah stared at her, and then he burst out laughing, a sound of pure, unburdened relief. He wiped an actual tear from his eye. Tonight, Star, we get the good pizza, and the good ice cream, and the good everything. He grabbed his phone. Extra cheese. 2 months. 60 days of momentum. The new reality had settled over them, comfortable and warm. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 8 o'clock. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, the same Formica table, but the papers spread before him were different. They were not bills, they were ledgers. Thorne-read ledgers. He was tired, a deep, bone-weary fatigue from working 14-hour days, but it was a good tired. It was the satisfaction of building. He was, for the first time in his life, fulfilled. Across from him, Aaliyah worked on her own ledger, a 7th-grade algebra worksheet. The only sounds in the small apartment were the scratching of her pencil and the quiet, contented hum of the refrigerator. Then the sound came. It was not a knock. It was a violation. A heavy percussive force struck the door, 3 rapid blasts that seemed to shake the cheap drywall. Bam! 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 Aaliyah jumped, her pencil flying onto the floor. Elijah looked up, his face a mask of confusion. It was not the sound of a neighbor. It was the sound of authority. "Elijah, you in there?" a voice shouted. Elijah moved to the door. "Who is it?" The response was muffled but firm. "Police. Open the door." Elijah's brow furrowed. He looked back at Aaliyah, his expression saying, "This is strange." He unlocked the deadbolt. The world slowed down. Aaliyah watched from the table as the door swung open. The dim hallway light was immediately blocked by 2 figures. They were massive, their broad shoulders filling the entire frame of the door. They wore dark blue uniforms, their jackets shiny with rain. The smell hit her first, sharp and metallic. The smell of wet wool and cold night air. It was an odor she would never forget. They stepped inside their boots, heavy on the linoleum, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Behind them, through the open doorway, Aaliyah could see the window at the end of the hall. It was flashing, red, blue, red, blue. The colors pulsed in the darkness, painting the walls of their apartment in silent, screaming light. "Elijah Reed," the first officer said. He was tall, with a face that looked carved from granite. "Yes. Is there a problem, officers?" Elijah's mind was racing. A mistake. This is a mistake. Did I forget a parking ticket? He was calculating, but the numbers would not add up. "Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back." "What?" Elijah's voice was calm, but Aaliyah saw the tremor in his hand. "Why? This is a mistake. My daughter is right here. I am sure we can sort this out at the precinct," the second officer said, his voice flat, bored. He was already reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. "What is this about?" Elijah demanded, his voice rising, a note of sharp offense in it. The first officer stated it plainly, as if reading a grocery list. "Elijah Reed, you are under arrest for embezzlement and felony fraud." Elijah laughed. It was a short, sharp, terrified sound. "Fraud? That is impossible. I am the CFO of—" The officer cut him off. "From the Thorne-Reed Partnership Fund, for the amount of $50,000. The number hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. $50,000. The same number that had been their salvation. Elijah's face went white. He stopped calculating. He just looked stunned. "No," he whispered. "No, Silas, no. This is a mistake. I manage the accounts. I am the accounts. You can check them right now. They are on my laptop. You can tell your story downtown," the second officer said. He grabbed Elijah's wrist. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound Aaliyah had ever heard. That sound broke the spell. She screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, primal sound of terror that clawed its way out of her chest. "No! Dad!" Elijah's head snapped toward her. The confusion was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. He was being pulled backward out the door. He struggled not against the officers, but against the fact of leaving. "Aaliyah!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Cha, I didn't do it. I did not do this. Aaliyah, I love you." His eyes were wide, desperate, trying to communicate a lifetime of truth in 1 second. "Dad!" Aaliyah scrambled from her chair, but the first officer put a hand out, blocking her. "Stay here, kid. Someone will come for you." And then he was gone. They pulled him into the hallway. The door was slammed shut, the heavy deadbolt clicking into place. The red and blue lights continued their silent, rhythmic flashing, sweeping over the empty kitchen, over the half-finished homework, over Aaliyah, who stood frozen, her mouth still open, the scream still trapped in her throat. The next day was a muffled gray experience. Aaliyah had sat through first period language arts, staring at a poster of a kitten hanging from a branch that read, "Hang in there." The words seemed like a cruel joke. She had not slept. She had remained on the kitchen floor until the blue and red lights stopped, and then she had moved to the sofa where she sat wrapped in a blanket until the sun came up. She did not register the classroom door opening or the quiet words spoken to her teacher. She only registered the hand on her shoulder. "Aaliyah, read," her teacher said, her voice strained with false cheer. "The principal needs to see you in his office." The walk was silent. The other children in the hallway rushing to their lockers seemed too loud, too bright. They were a different species. Aaliyah felt like she was moving underwater. The principal's office was quiet. Principal Myers, a man who usually had a booming voice, looked small and uncomfortable behind his large desk. He was not the person in charge. The person in charge was a woman Aaliyah had never seen before. She sat in the guest chair holding a clipboard. She wore a beige pantsuit that seemed to have no wrinkles, as if it were made of plastic. "Aaliyah, this is Ms. Dawson," Principal Myers said, his voice barely a whisper. "She is here to help." Ms. Dawson smiled. The smile was an official action. It was precise, brief, and did not involve her eyes. "Hello, Aaliyah. I am with Child and Family Services. I just want to talk for a few minutes." Aaliyah sat in the other chair. It was too big for her. She felt like she was shrinking. "Aaliyah." Ms. Dawson began, her voice a practiced, smooth monotone. "I know this is a very difficult time. Your father, he is experiencing some significant legal trouble." Trouble. Aaliyah turned the word over in her mind. Trouble was forgetting your homework. Trouble was spilling paint. What happened last night, the sound of the handcuffs, the smell of the wet wool, that was not trouble. It was an amputation. Ms. Dawson continued, the words clicking into place. "While this situation is being sorted out, we need to make sure you are in a safe and stable environment. So, we have made arrangements. You are going to go and stay with your aunt for a little while. Your Aunt Tanya." Aaliyah did not cry. The tears that had threatened last night had evaporated, burned away by something cold and hard that was now sitting in her chest. It was anger. It was a clean, pure, silent rage. "My dad did not steal." The words were a scream inside her head, but her face remained blank. She looked at Ms. Dawson, at this woman with her clipboard and her beige plastic life. This woman was a liar. She was part of the system that had taken her father. The police had lied. The world had lied. And now this woman was sitting here smiling her fake procedural smile and lying too. The betrayal felt absolute. It was the feeling of discovering that gravity was not real. Aaliyah looked at the kitten poster on Principal Myers' wall. "Hang in there." "Do you understand what I'm saying, Aaliyah?" Ms. Dawson asked. Aaliyah gave a single sharp nod. The office door opened, and this time the sound was not quiet. It was a gasp. Aunt Tanya, Elijah's younger sister, stood in the doorway. She was 28 years old, but today she looked 50. Her eyes were swollen and red, her hair was a mess, and she was clutching a wad of tissues in one hand. "Oh, baby," Tanya whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh, Aaliyah." She rushed forward, collapsing into the chair next to Aaliyah, and pulled her into a desperate, crushing hug. The embrace was suffocating. It smelled of stale coffee fear and the cheap perfume Tanya always wore. Tanya was sobbing loud, wet sounds that filled the small office. Aaliyah did not hug her back. She remained perfectly still, her arms locked at her sides, her spine rigid. She was a statue. She let her aunt, the last adult in her world, cling to her and weep. But Aaliyah did not move. Tanya was crying because she believed the lie. She believed it. The betrayal was complete. Aunt Tanya's apartment was a symphony of chaos, where Aaliyah's home had been a space of quiet calculations defined by the scratch of a pencil and the hum of a refrigerator. This apartment was an assault. It was a two-bedroom unit on the 4th floor of a walk-up, and it already held 4 people. Now it held 5. The air smelled wrong. It was a thick, humid mix of baby powder, stale cigarette smoke from the hallway, and the faint, sweet smell of burnt onions. A television in the corner blared a cartoon with bright, screaming colors. Jamal, her 3-year-old cousin, was running a plastic truck into the leg of the sofa over and over, providing a percussive, jarring rhythm. In the bedroom, the baby Maya, only 6 months old, was crying a thin, persistent wail that cut through everything. Aaliyah stood by her suitcase, a small pink bag that Ms. Dawson had forced Tanya to go back and pack. She felt like a statue, an object that had been placed in the wrong room. "Okay, baby," Tanya said, her voice high and strained. She was 28, but the panic in her eyes made her look older. She was vibrating with stress, her hands fluttering from her hair to her jeans and back again. "Okay, this is it. It's not much, but it's home." She looked around and her brittle smile faltered. She saw what Aaliyah saw, the cramped space, the pile of laundry on the only armchair, the screaming toddler. "Jamal, stop it. Stop that noise," Tanya snapped. Jamal looked at her, his face crumpled, and began to cry, adding a new harmony to the chaos. "Oh Lord," Tanya muttered, rubbing her temples. She turned back to Aaliyah, forcing the smile again. "It's okay, baby. It's fine. We are fine. You're hungry. I can make you something." She looked at the kitchen, which was a tiny corner of the living room. "I have noodles." Aaliyah just shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. Okay. Well," Tanya pointed to a narrow canvas cot wedged between the sofa and the wall, right under the window that looked out onto a brick air shaft. That's for you. It's not the palace, but it's all yours. You can put your things there." Aaliyah looked at the cot. It was temporary. Everything about it screamed temporary. She understood with the cold, sharp clarity that had settled in her chest that her aunt was terrified. Tanya loved her. Aaliyah knew that in an abstract way, but this was different. This was not a weekend visit. This was a financial grenade that had just detonated in her aunt's already precarious life. Tanya did not have the money for this. She did not have the space. She did not have the emotional energy. Aaliyah was not family to be welcomed. She was a burden to be absorbed. Later that night, the apartment finally achieved a level of quiet. The television was off. Jamal was asleep on a pallet on his mother's floor. The baby was for now silent. The only sound was the hiss of the radiator and the distant wail of sirens, a constant urban lullaby. Aaliyah lay on the cot, fully clothed, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. She was not tired. She was waiting. She heard Tanya in the kitchen. The linoleum creaked. She heard the soft beep of the cordless phone, and then her aunt's voice, hushed and urgent. "Mama," Tanya whispered. "Yeah, I am here. She's asleep, I think." Aaliyah's entire body went rigid. She did not breathe. She was listening to her aunt talk to her grandmother. "Mama, I don't know what to do." Tanya's voice cracked, the whisper breaking into a half sob. I can't do this." There was a long pause as the grandmother spoke. "No, don't say that, Mama. Of course I love her. You know I love her, but Elijah. God, Elijah." Tanya's voice dropped as if speaking the name was a sin. $50,000, Mama. 50,000. The whisper was sharp now, full of a bitter, disbelieving anger. What was he thinking? What did he do? He always did this. Always reaching for something shiny, always talking about big plans instead of just being grateful for what he had. He always wanted more. Another pause. Tanya was crying now, quiet, angry tears. And now this. Now, Aaliyah. Tanya took a sharp breath. Her life, Mama. Her life is over. It's over before it even started. And he did it. He did this to her. Aaliyah closed her eyes. The cot felt like it was made of ice. The last fragile thread of hope she hadn't even known she was holding, the idea that someone in her family would be on their side, snapped. Tanya thought he was guilty. Her own sister believed he was a thief. The cold anger from the principal's office returned, but it was different now. It was heavier. It was not the anger of betrayal. It was the terrifying, absolute clarity of isolation. She was alone. The county jail smelled of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and quiet despair. It was a place where all the color had been drained away, leaving only shades of beige gray and institutional green. Tanya had filled out the paperwork with a shaking hand, her pen slipping on the form. Aaliyah just stood and watched a small, silent 11-year-old girl in a waiting room full of weeping women and angry, restless men. A guard with a flat, tired voice called his name. "Read Elijah." They were led into a long room divided by a wall of thick, scratched glass. On the other side of the glass was a row of men in identical bright orange jumpsuits. Aaliyah scanned the line. She did not recognize her father at first. The man who sat down in front of them was a stranger. Elijah Reed had been a man defined by his meticulous energy and his quiet pride. This man was a ghost. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, 2 sizes too big, the color screaming against his ashen skin. He had not shaved. His eyes, the same eyes that just days ago were bright with hope, were now hollow, red-rimmed, and utterly broken. Tanya sat heavily fumbling with the black telephone receiver, her face a mask of pity and fear. Aaliyah sat beside her, her movements precise. She picked up her own receiver. It was heavy, cold, and smelled of antiseptic. On the other side of the glass, Elijah picked up his phone. He looked at Aaliyah, and his face, the face of this new, terrible stranger, crumpled. He pressed his forehead against the glass, and his shoulders began to shake with silent, agonizing sobs. "Oh, Aaliyah." His voice crackled over the poor connection. It was a hoarse whisper. "Baby, I am so sorry. I am so sorry you have to see me like this. I am sorry." Tanya was crying again. Her own receiver pressed to her ear as she muttered, "Oh, Elijah. Oh, God." Aaliyah did not cry. She watched her father weep, her expression unreadable. She waited. "What happened, Dad?" she asked. Her voice was not a child's voice. It was clear and steady over the line. Elijah looked up, his eyes swimming. They said I stole it. The money, the $50,000. They said I took it." "But you didn't," Aaliyah stated. It was not a question. "No," he choked out. "No. I swear to you, Aaliyah. I swear on your mother's grave, I did not touch that money." He was frantic, his words tumbling out. "They said they found documents with my signature, papers saying I withdrew the money." He shook his head, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic innocence. "But I never signed them, Star. I never signed those papers. Someone faked it." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "It was him. It had to be. Silas Thorne. He set me up. He gamed the books and he used my name. He framed me Aaliyah." Tanya let out a small, wounded sound, a sound of doubt. Aaliyah ignored her. She looked directly into her father's terrified eyes through the scratches and the thick, impermeable barrier. "I believe you, Dad." His breath hitched. The desperate torrent of words stopped. "You do. I know you," she said, her voice absolute. "You would never." He pressed his hand flat against the glass, a gesture of profound, agonizing helplessness. Aaliyah mirrored him. She raised her small hand and placed it against her side of the partition. She could see his fingerprints, his palm, the lines of his life, but she could not feel him. There was no warmth. There was only the cold, unyielding, sterile surface of the glass wall that separated their worlds. It was the most terrible feeling she had ever known. He tried then to be a father again. He tried to pull himself together. "Listen to me, Aaliyah," he said, his voice straining for a normalcy that was grotesque in this place. "You need to stay with your Aunt Tanya. You need to be good. Okay, go to school. Do your homework. Don't worry about me. I will figure this out. I will fix this." The advice was pathetic. Aaliyah saw it for what it was. It was the hollow sound of a man trying to build a house in the middle of an earthquake. Go to school. Do your homework. The words were meaningless pebbles thrown against a tidal wave. He was not in control. He could not fix this. A sharp buzzing sound erupted in the room. A guard yelled, "Time!" "No, wait!" Elijah said, his eyes going wide again with panic. "I need more time. Aaliyah!" His phone clicked off. The connection was dead. The guard was already behind him, pulling him to his feet. "I love you, Star," he yelled, his voice muffled by the glass. "Always remember, I love you." Aaliyah did not move. She kept her hand pressed to the glass, watching as the stranger in the orange jumpsuit who was her father was led away, disappearing down the gray, hopeless hallway. School was no longer a refuge. It was a courtroom of whispers. Aaliyah Reed, at 11 years old, had become a ghost and a spectacle all at once. She walked the hallways of Westview Middle School with her spine rigid, her eyes fixed straight ahead, but she could feel the attention. It was a physical weight on her skin, a heavy itching sensation between her shoulder blades. The social geometry had shifted overnight. Her friends, the girls she had eaten lunch with every day for 2 years, now found fascinating things to look at in their lockers when she approached. Conversation stopped when she entered a room only to reignite in venomous husky whispers the second she passed. She heard them. They did not even try to be quiet. "That's her," a girl named Jessica whispered by the water fountain. "The one whose dad—" "My mother said he stole $50,000. Another voice replied, the number spoken with a breathless theatrical awe. "Like from a movie." The cafeteria was the worst. It was a loud, bright amphitheater of her humiliation. She sat at the end of a long blue table alone. Her tray with its untouched apple and dry hamburger was an island. She could feel the stares. She could hear the snickers from the boys' table 2 rows over. She focused on her apple, pretending to read the small sticker as if it held the secrets of the universe. The isolation was a wall of glass, just like the one at the jail. She was on one side, and the rest of the world, the loud, normal laughing world, was on the other. On Thursday, the wall of whispers was finally breached. A boy named Marcus, a loud, clumsy boy who always smelled faintly of cheese dust, did not bother to whisper. He slid onto the bench opposite her, his tray slamming down. "Hey, Reed," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Aaliyah did not look up. She kept her focus on the apple sticker. "My dad says your dad is going to prison," Marcus pressed on, emboldened by her silence. "He says they lock him up and throw away the key. Is it true he's a thief? Did he really steal all that money?" The hum of the cafeteria died. The tables nearby went silent, a ring of quiet spreading outward. Aaliyah's hands, resting in her lap, clenched into small, white-knuckled fists. The cold, hard anger that had been sitting in her chest since the visit, the anger that had replaced the tears, rose up. It burned in her throat. She slowly lifted her head. She did not cry. She did not flush. She simply looked at Marcus, her eyes flat and cold. "My father is innocent," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and sharp. It was not a defense. It was a statement of fact, as certain as the 23 watts of power her brain was generating. Marcus, who had been expecting tears or a denial, faltered. His stupid grin faded. "That is enough, Mr. Davis." The voice cut through the silence, sharp and professional. Aaliyah looked. Ms. Boyd was standing there. Her arms were crossed, and she was glaring at Marcus with an expression that tolerated no argument. Ms. Boyd was the one teacher Aaliyah actually liked. She was the one who ran the science club. She was the teacher from the meeting. Marcus scrambled up. "I was just asking." "You were not. Go," Ms. Boyd commanded, pointing to another table. Marcus, no longer brave, grabbed his tray and fled. The cafeteria noise slowly, reluctantly returned. Ms. Boyd looked down at Aaliyah, her expression softening. "Walk with me," she said gently. Aaliyah picked up her tray, dumped her uneaten food, and followed her teacher into the empty hallway. Ms. Boyd leaned against the brick wall away from the prying eyes of the cafeteria. She knelt slightly to get closer to Aaliyah's eye level. "Aaliyah," she said, her voice quiet, "do not listen to them. They are children. They are just repeating the ugly things they hear from adults who should know better." Aaliyah just stared at the floor. "You know your truth." Ms. Boyd continued, her voice firm but kind. "You know who your father is. Do not let them take that from you. Hold on to it. Hold on tight." Aaliyah nodded, a single jerky motion. She was grateful. It was the first kind word an adult other than her father had spoken to her in days. But as she walked back to class, a cold realization settled over her. Ms. Boyd's words were kind, but they were not enough. Truth. Belief. Those words were weak. Her father had believed in Silas Thorne. Aunt Tanya believed her brother was a criminal. Belief was just a feeling. It was not solid. Belief would not open a jail cell. She did not need belief. She needed proof. It was past 11 o'clock. The apartment had finally succumbed to a tense, exhausted silence. Jamal was asleep, a small lump on the floor. The baby Maya was quiet in the other room. Aaliyah lay on the cot, her back to the living room, her breathing shallow and even. She had perfected the rhythm of sleep. She was wide awake. The streetlights from the air shaft cast a weak gray rectangle on the opposite wall. She heard the creak of a floorboard from the kitchen area. A pause. Then the soft beep of the cordless phone being picked up. Aunt Tanya's voice followed a low, urgent whisper that sliced through the quiet. "Yes, Mr. Grant. Thank you for calling back so late. I needed to know what happened today. What did Elijah say?" Aaliyah's body went rigid, her muscles tightening under the thin blanket. She focused on the sound tuning out the radiator's hiss. Tanya was quiet for a long time listening. Aaliyah could picture the tired, overworked lawyer on the other end, a man she had never seen but already hated. "What?" Tanya's voice broke. "What do you mean, no? What did he say?" "No, he is not stubborn, Mr. Grant, he is—" Another pause, this one longer. Aaliyah heard a small, strangled sound from the kitchen, as if Tanya was holding back a sob. "But what about what I told you? About Silas? About the partnership?" The silence stretched. Aaliyah could feel the weight of the lawyer's words, the professional exhaustion, the bureaucratic dismissal. Tanya's next words were sharp, desperate. "What do you mean the evidence is too strong? Are you his lawyer or not? You are supposed to fight for him. You do not even believe him, do you?" Aaliyah's heart felt like a cold stone in her chest. He does not believe him. "No, wait, please," Tanya said, her voice dropping, the anger becoming a beg. "I am sorry, please. What happens now? What are they offering?" Aaliyah squeezed her eyes shut. Offering. Like it was a negotiation for a used car, not a life. "What?" Tanya's voice was a dead, hollow whisper. 3 years. If he pleads guilty." "And," Tanya asked, her voice trembling, "and if he does not? If he fights it, like he says he wants to?" Aaliyah counted the seconds of silence. 1, 2, 3, 4. 10. Tanya choked on the word. Oh God, 10 years. The dam of her aunt's professional respect for the lawyer finally broke. "But why won't you? I know you are busy. I know you said you have 50 other cases, I know. But this is his life. The signature does not—" "He said the signature is wrong. The bank records." Hello? Tanya's voice faded away. Aaliyah heard the soft click of the phone being placed back in its cradle. The silence that followed was louder than the phone call. It was absolute, a vacuum of hope. Aaliyah heard a scraping sound, a chair leg on linoleum, then a low, muffled sound. Tanya was crying. Not the loud, frantic sobs from the principal's office. This was a deeper, hopeless sound. The sound of acceptance. The sound of surrender. Aaliyah did not move for a full minute. Then she swung her legs off the cot. The springs made a small protesting squeak. In the kitchen, the crying stopped instantly. "Aaliyah!" Tanya's voice was thick and startled. "Baby, I thought you were asleep." Aaliyah walked the few steps into the kitchen area. Tanya was sitting at the small table, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The room was dark, lit only by the yellow glow of the stove's clock light. "Aaliyah, baby, go back to bed," Tanya whispered, wiping her face. "It's late. It's just adult stuff." "He said 10 years, Aaliyah said. It was not a question. Tanya flinched. The lie was pointless. We do not know that for sure, baby. That is just if it goes bad. He wants Dad to plead guilty for 3 years. Tanya finally looked up. Her eyes were red, defeated, pragmatic. "Aaliyah," she said, her voice breaking, "you have to be realistic. You are smart. You know numbers. The evidence. They have papers. They have the bank. Your father, he just needs to make this easy for everyone, for you." Aaliyah looked at her aunt, this woman who loved her, who was trying to protect her, and she felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. The last adult had just failed. "You think he's guilty?" Aaliyah said. The words landed in the dark kitchen with the force of a slap. "No, baby, I did not say that." Tanya stood up, reaching for her. I just think he might have made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake, but he is in over his head. And 3 years is better than 10. We can visit. We can... Aaliyah took one step back out of the reach of her aunt's hand. Tanya's words died. The gap between them was suddenly a canyon. You think he did it? Aaliyah repeated, her voice dead flat. Aaliyah turned around. She walked back to her cot. She did not say goodnight. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Aaliyah, baby, please. Tanya begged from the kitchen. Aaliyah said nothing. She faced the wall. The decision was made. The lawyer was useless. Her aunt had surrendered. The adults were all wrong. If her father was going to be saved, she was the one who would have to do it. The lie was surprisingly easy. I have a project, Aaliyah said on Saturday morning, her voice flat and neutral. Aunt Tanya, who was trying to feed the baby and stop Jamal from pouring juice on the carpet, did not even look up. A project on a Saturday. A group project. At the downtown library. It is due Monday. Tanya waved a hand dismissively, her attention on Jamal. Fine, fine. Just be back before dark and call me. Do not talk to strangers. I will, Aaliyah said. She slung her empty backpack over her shoulder. She had $5 in her pocket for the bus. And she had one other thing, the thing Tanya had forgotten, the thing that had been in Aaliyah's school bag when the world ended, her house key. She did not go to the library. She took the number 41 bus, the one that smelled of diesel fumes and unwashed bodies. She sat in the back, her small body pressed against the vibrating window, and watched the city go by. She watched people laughing, people arguing, people walking dogs, people living their normal, unbroken lives. It all seemed impossibly frivolous. She got off at her stop. The street looked the same, but different. It felt like a set from a movie, a place she recognized, but that was not real. She walked to her building. Apartment 3B. Her hand was shaking so badly she could not get the key into the lock on the first try. The small metallic sound of the key scraping against the lock seemed to echo in the empty hallway. She finally pushed it in. She turned the bolt. The click of the lock disengaging was the loudest sound in the world. It sounded final. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. It was not the smell of home. It was not bacon or coffee or the lavender soap her father used. It was the smell of nothing. It was the smell of stale trapped air, of dust, of cold plumbing. It was the smell of a place where life had stopped. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch was soft, sealing her inside. The apartment was suffocatingly silent. Dust motes danced in the single beam of gray light coming from the living room window. A thin layer of grime of settled dust covered every surface. The mail that had been pushed through the slot lay scattered on the floor by the door. Red-windowed envelopes, junk mail, a pizza flyer. She stood in the small entryway. To her left was the kitchen. The place that had been so warm, so full of life just weeks ago, was now a dead gray space. A memory sharp and violent ambushed her. Her father at the stove flipping a pancake. His head turned a wide, genuine laugh at one of her jokes. 23 watts, he'd said. I feel like my utility bill says I'm generating more. The memory was so clear, so total, that she almost expected to hear his voice. But there was only the oppressive, thick silence. She took a step, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She walked to the small Formica table, the place where they had eaten their last good meal, the pizza, the night he had announced the partnership. She ran her finger across the surface. It came away black with grit. This was not her home. This was a tomb. This was the empty shell of a life that had been stolen. She looked at the hook by the door where her father always hung his keys. It was empty. She looked at the refrigerator, at the colorful misspelled magnet that said "World's Best Dad." The sight of it made her stomach clench. The emotional wall she had been building for days, the cold, hard anger suddenly cracked. A single hot tear, a tear of pure agonizing grief, rolled down her cheek. It was not fair. She was 11 years old. She was supposed to be worried about algebra and library projects, not this, not the smell of dust, not the silence, not the empty hook on the wall. She wanted her dad. She just wanted her dad back. The sobs came silent and shaking her small body, trembling in the cold kitchen. She let herself cry for exactly 30 seconds. Then she wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie. The tears were a luxury. The grief was a distraction. Crying would not open a jail cell. Crying would not change her aunt's mind. Crying would not beat Silas Thorne. She took a deep, shuddering breath. She had not come here to grieve. She had come here to work. She squared her shoulders. She had to stop thinking like a daughter. She had to stop feeling like a child. She had to think like him. "Think like Dad," she whispered. The sound of her own voice was alien in the room. What did that mean? It meant logic. It meant numbers. It meant details. It meant you did not guess you knew. You did not feel you proved. She looked at the apartment again. It was no longer a tomb. It was a file. It was a case, and she was the investigator. Her mission began. She walked past the living room, her steps purposeful, and turned down the short hallway toward her father's bedroom. Elijah's bedroom was the quietest place in the apartment. His presence was so strong here that the silence felt different, more like a pause than an absence. His bed was neatly made, the corners tucked with military precision. His shoes, 2 pairs, were aligned perfectly by the dresser. And then there was the desk. It was an old, heavy wooden desk that had been his grandfather's. It was the only expensive thing he owned. Aaliyah approached it with a sense of reverence. The police had been here. It was obvious. The computer tower was gone, a square of clean, unfaded wood marking where it had been. The printer was unplugged, its cables coiled uselessly on the floor. A single empty evidence bag lay crumpled near the trash can. They had taken the Thorne Reed files. They had taken the official ledgers. They had taken the computer, the brain of his operation. But they had not taken the clutter. Her father, so meticulous in his professional life, was a pack rat in his personal one. Piled high on the desk were stacks of manila folders, receipts, and old mail that he considered personal. The police, in their search for the $50,000 crime, had deemed these stacks irrelevant. Aaliyah sat in his chair. It still smelled faintly of him, that scent of lavender soap and coffee. She pushed aside the grief. She was not here to mourn. She was here to audit. She began with the first stack: utilities, auto insurance, medical. It was a ledger of their small, struggling life, paid on time every time. She moved to the second stack: old tax returns, apartment lease. Her hand brushed a thin green folder at the bottom. It was not labeled with his neat printed handwriting. It was just a plain folder shoved underneath everything. It felt out of place. She pulled it out. It was labeled in his quick cursive TR memos. It was not an official file. It was his scratch pad. She opened it. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. Inside were a few stapled meeting agendas, some notes scribbled on a yellow legal pad, and a single sheet of paper, a flimsy pink carbon copy. She read the header: Bank of City, wire transfer request. Her breath hitched. She saw the number before she saw anything else. It was typed neat and clinical. Amount $50,000. A wave of nausea, cold and acidic, rose in her throat. No. What if Tanya was right? What if it was all a lie? What if her father, the man who saved every receipt, was a thief? The proof was right here in her hands in his private folder. Her eyes dropped to the signature line at the bottom. Elijah Reed. She stared at the name, her vision blurring. She had seen this signature her entire life. She had seen it on checks for school field trips. She had seen it on every single report card since kindergarten. She had seen it on the "From Dad" on her last birthday card. She knew his signature better than she knew her own. And this was not it. The panic and the nausea vanished, replaced by a sudden absolute and freezing cold clarity. It was a forgery. It was close. It was a good forgery. A stranger would be fooled. The bank had been fooled. But she was not a stranger. She was his daughter. She pulled the paper closer, her mind racing, auditing. The E in Elijah. Her dad's E was sharp, a single fluid motion where the middle bar was a fast, confident hook. This E was loopy. It was rounded. The R in Reed. Her dad's R was angular, 2 sharp strokes like a roof and a leg. This R was soft, the curve hesitant. It was not just wrong, it was slow. Her father's signature was fast, the confident scrawl of a man signing his own name. This signature was the careful, plodding drawing of a man who was terrified of making a mistake. This was the signature of a criminal. And that criminal was not her father. The cold anger flooded her. It felt like strength. He had been framed. He was innocent. This pink piece of paper was not a conviction. It was the first piece of proof. Her hands moved faster now, energized, no longer trembling. She tore through the rest of the folder. Agendas, notes, more scribbles, and then at the very bottom a single printed email. It was not a memo. It was a message to her father from Silas Thorne. Her eyes scanned the date at the top, February 20th. She did the math. That was 3 weeks before the money disappeared. She read the subject line, "Re-partnership future." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She read the email. "Elijah," it began. It was cold formal, so different from the booming, friendly voice she had heard her father imitate. "I have been reviewing the quarterly numbers and our projected overhead. This partnership is not working out the way I had hoped. The margins are not what I expected." Aaliyah's eyes flew to the next line. She read it once, and then again, her mind struggling to process the words. "I am going to need my initial investment back soon. Let us discuss how to dissolve the business properly at our next meeting." Aaliyah stood up from the desk. The folder slipped from her lap and fell to the floor. She did not notice. Dissolve the business. He wanted his money back. The logic hit her like a physical force so sharp and clear it almost knocked her over. Silas Thorne wanted his $50,000 back. But the email said he wanted to dissolve the business. Her internal monologue was sharp fast, a series of clicks just like her father's. If you want your money back, you just ask for it. You dissolve the business like the email says. You take your money and you leave. Unless you want more than just your money. What if you wanted the money back, but you also wanted a victim? What if you took your own money back and then blamed Dad for it? Then you have the $50,000. And you also get to look like a poor, betrayed partner. You get to sue. You get to collect insurance. You get to look innocent while you destroy someone else. It was not a theft. It was a substitution. He had substituted her father's life for his own financial problems. "You liar," Aaliyah whispered to the cold, empty room. She knelt. She carefully picked up the pink carbon copy. She folded it precisely. She folded the printed email. She did not put them back in the folder. She unzipped her backpack, the one she was supposed to be taking to the library. She slid the 2 pieces of paper inside, placing them in the hidden pocket where she kept her emergency money. She was no longer just a girl in an empty apartment. She was a witness, and she had her evidence. Her mind was electric. She had the forgery. She had the motive. But it felt incomplete. There was a piece missing. She was still kneeling on the floor, the 2 pieces of paper clutched in her hand. She unfolded the pink carbon copy again, smoothing the creases. She stared at the forgery, at the slow looping signature of the man who was not her father. She forced herself to read past the signature to read the other parts of the form. The other typed clinical numbers. Date March 15th. Time 2:30 p.m. March 15th. The day felt lodged in her brain like a pebble in her shoe. Why? It was just a day. It was weeks ago. March 15th. She tried to reconstruct it. It was a Tuesday. She had algebra. She had gym. And then something. Something in the afternoon? Aaliyah stood up, her legs stiff. She ran out of her father's room, her sneakers pounding on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing too loud in the dead apartment. She ran to her own room, a small pink space that still smelled like her. Her backpack, the one she had been using that day, was still lying on the floor, discarded exactly where she had thrown it when she came home from school that last normal afternoon. She ripped open the main zipper. She pulled out a history textbook, a crumpled permission slip, and her school planner. It was a cheap planner, the kind the school gave out for free, with a laminated picture of the school mascot on the front. Her hands were shaking now. She fumbled with the pages, flipping back through April, back through the last weeks of March. She found the right week. Her own handwriting in bright purple gel pen stared back at her. She found the entry for Tuesday, March 15th. The world stopped. There in the 2 o'clock slot she had written 2 words, Parent-Teacher Conference, and next to it, Ms. Boyd. And because she was her father's daughter, she had drawn a neat line through the 3 o'clock slot indicating the end time. He was at her school. She sank down onto her bed, the planner falling open in her lap. The memory, which had been a vague fog, now rushed in sharp and in full color, a perfect, painful recollection. The memory was bright. Ms. Boyd's classroom smelled of chalk dust, old paper, and the faint cinnamon scent of the hamster cage in the corner. Aaliyah sat in a chair that was too small for him next to her father, who was in a chair that was definitely too small for him. He was wearing his one good suit, the navy one, his tie knotted perfectly. He looked proud, his chest puffed out, his smile barely contained. Honestly, Mr. Reed, Ms. Boyd said, her own smile warm and genuine. She gestured to the solar system diorama on her desk, the one Aaliyah had spent 3 weeks on. It is the best one I have seen in 10 years of teaching. The detail on the asteroid belt college level. Elijah beamed. He did not look at Ms. Boyd. He looked at Aaliyah. She did it all herself. I just bought the glitter. Well, it is more than the glitter, Ms. Boyd said, tapping a printout of Aaliyah's grades. Straight A's, again. Her science scores are in the 99th percentile for the state. We need to be talking about the advanced placement program for her, the high school level courses. Elijah's smile faltered, replaced by a look of such profound, vulnerable pride that it almost hurt Aaliyah to see it. He looked down at his hands, then back at Ms. Boyd. She gets all the brains, he said, his voice thick. I am just the guy who makes the pancakes. You are doing a lot more than that, Mr. Reed, Ms. Boyd said softly. She is a remarkable, focused, and kind kid. You have done a wonderful job. The meeting had lasted the full hour. They talked about high school. They talked about her future. When the bell rang at 3 o'clock, Elijah stood up and shook Ms. Boyd's hand with a firm, grateful grip. Thank you, he said. Thank you for seeing her. They walked out of the school back into the bright, cold March afternoon. The air was sharp. Elijah slung his arm over Aaliyah's shoulder, pulling her into his side. A+ star, A+ kid, A+ dad. I think that deserves a reward, do you not? He did not wait for an answer. He steered her down the block, past the check-cashing place, past the laundromat, to the small cafe on the corner brew. It had smelled like heaven of dark roast coffee and sugar. He ordered his usual, a large black coffee. He ordered her usual, a small hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. He paid for it not with the cash in his wallet, but with his debit card, the blue one he used for fun stuff. They sat at the small table by the window, their knees touching, and drank their drinks. They were a team. They were unstoppable, the best in the state. The memory dissolved. The apartment was cold and gray again. The silence was heavy. He was with her. The entire time from 2 o'clock to well past 3, he was at her school and then at the coffee shop. He was with her. But who would believe her a kid? A daughter desperate to save her father. They would say she was lying. They would say she was confused. Ms. Boyd, she thought. Ms. Boyd would remember. But she was just one person. Aaliyah needed something hard, something plastic, something her father, the meticulous accountant, would have created. The coffee shop. He paid with his card. Aaliyah shot up from the bed. She ran back to the desk in her father's room. The stacks were still a mess, but she did not care. She was not a neat investigator anymore. She was a scavenger. She was looking for one thing. Receipts, 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 she muttered, her hands flying, pushing aside folders of old bills and car insurance. He kept them. He kept everything. He had folders for groceries and gas and utilities. And he had a small accordion-style folder held shut with a rubber band labeled in his sharp black print, credit card receipts. 2024. She ripped the rubber band off. The folder sprang open. The receipts were in alphabetical order. A, B, C. Her fingers, clumsy and shaking, fumbled. C, City Gas, CVS. And then, Corner Brew. It was not one receipt. It was a dozen. He bought coffee there almost every other day. Her heart sank. No, she whispered. Think. Think. She pulled all of them out, a small, flimsy pile of white paper. She spread them on the floor, a timeline of their lives, one cup of coffee at a time. She checked the dates. March 3rd, March 5th, March 9th, March 11th, March 15th. It was there. It was the 5th one down. A small, perfect white rectangle of truth. She read the details, her eyes flying across the faded purple ink. The Corner Brew. 1950 Oak Street. March 15th, 2024. Time 2:47 p.m. 1. Large coffee. 1. Small hot choc. Total $6.50. Paid debit card. She let out a breath she did not know she was holding. It was a sob. She had it. The bank where the money was stolen was on the other side of the city. Downtown. Her school and the Corner Brew were in uptown. It was a 30-minute drive. At 2:30 in the afternoon, her father was in a classroom with her and Ms. Boyd. At 2:47, 15 minutes later, he was buying her a hot chocolate. He could not be in two places at once. Aaliyah carefully, reverently folded the small receipt. She stood up. She slid the receipt and her school planner into the secret pocket of her backpack next to the forgery in the email. She had the motive. She had the fake signature. And now she had the alibi. She had a case. Mr. Grant's office was not an office. It was a testament to apathy. It was a small, windowless room on the third floor of the county building, smelling of stale coffee and dusty paper. Files were stacked not just on the desk, but in precarious, leaning towers on the floor. David Grant, the public defender, looked exactly like his office. He was a man in his late 40s with a cheap suit, a coffee-stained tie, and the most exhausted eyes Aaliyah had ever seen. "All right," he said, not looking up from a file. "Tanya, you said it was an emergency. I have a hearing in 10 minutes. Tanya, who was clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands, looked terrified. "Mr. Grant, thank you. Aaliyah, she found something." Grant finally looked up. He saw Aaliyah. His expression soured. "A kid. Great. Listen, Ms. Reed, I told you on the phone the plea is the only—" "You are a terrible lawyer," Aaliyah said. The room went silent. Tanya gasped. "Aaliyah, my God, you do not—" Grant's eyes narrowed. "What did you say to me, little girl?" "My father is innocent," Aaliyah said, her voice cold and clear. She stepped forward, unzipping her backpack. "You are supposed to be finding evidence, but you are not. You are just tired, so I did your job for you." She reached into her bag. Tanya was muttering, "Oh Lord, I am so sorry, Mr. Grant, she is just upset." Grant held up a hand, silencing Tanya. He was not angry. He looked almost amused. "You did my job. Okay, show me. What did you find?" "A secret map." Aaliyah ignored the sarcasm. She began placing the items on his desk one by one, as if she were the lawyer and he were the client. "One," she said, sliding the pink carbon copy onto his desk. "The signature. It is a forgery." Grant glanced at it. "Kid handwriting experts cost—" "You do not need an expert," Aaliyah snapped. "Look at the E in Elijah. It is loopy. My father's E is sharp. Look at the R in Reed. It is soft. My father's R is angular. It is a fake, a bad one." Grant leaned in, his amusement fading. He was looking. "Two," Aaliyah said, sliding the printed email next to it. "The motive. This is an email from Silas Thorne, dated 3 weeks before the theft. He wanted to dissolve the partnership. He wanted his $50,000 back." Grant's eyes scanned the email. He grunted. "Circumstantial. Proves he was unhappy, not that he is a criminal." "3," Aaliyah said. Her voice dropped and the entire room seemed to focus on the last 2 items in her hand. She placed her school planner on the desk, opening it to the marked page. "The alibi. March 15th, the day the money was stolen, 2:00 p.m. My father was at my school for a parent-teacher conference with Ms. Boyd." Grant was no longer leaning back. He was sitting up straight. "And 4, Aaliyah finished. She placed the small, flimsy receipt onto the planner. 2:47 p.m., 15 minutes after the theft. He was at the Corner Brew buying me a hot chocolate. The coffee shop is in Uptown. The bank is in downtown. It is a 30-minute drive." She paused, her case-made. "He could not be in 2 places at once." Grant was silent. He picked up the receipt, holding the small piece of paper as if it were a bomb. He looked at the date. He looked at the planner. He looked back at Aaliyah, and for the first time he was not looking at a child. He was looking at a witness. "This," Grant said, his voice a low whisper, "is solid. This is an alibi." He scooped up the papers. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a thin, sharp flicker of a different kind of energy. The energy of a fight. "Okay," he said to Tanya, to Aaliyah, to himself. "Let me see what I can do. I have to make some calls." That was a week ago. It had been a week of a strange, agonizing new emotion. Hope. It had infected Tanya. She had cleaned the apartment. She had cooked a real dinner, chicken and rice. She had even smiled a real smile at Aaliyah. "He is going to fix it, baby," she had whispered. "You fixed it." Aaliyah knew this hope was a fragile, dangerous thing. The phone rang on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Tanya grabbed it. "Hello, Mr. Grant." Tanya's face lit up. She hit the speakerphone button, a gesture of celebration. Yes, we are both here. Aaliyah is right here. Did you get it? Tell us the good news. Grant's voice filled the small room, rattling from the cheap speaker. But it was not the voice of victory. It was the voice Aaliyah remembered from the first phone call, the voice of total bone-deep exhaustion. Tanya, he sighed, I am sorry. Tanya's smile froze. What? What do you mean? I mean, I tried, Grant said, his voice flat. The alibi. The kid was 100% right. It is a perfect alibi. So, Tanya said, her voice rising with confusion. So what is the problem? The problem, Grant said, is the system. I called the school. I spoke to the principal. I found the teacher, this Ms. Boyd. She remembers the conference. She remembers Elijah. She confirms the whole thing. Thank God, Tanya breathed. Do not thank him yet. Grant cut her off. The school district's legal department called me back an hour later. They are forbidding Ms. Boyd from testifying. It is against district policy for faculty to get involved in the personal criminal cases of parents. They will not allow her to be subpoenaed. Tanya's hand went to her mouth. No, that is not. They cannot. They can, Grant said, and they are, so I lost my witness. But the receipt, Aaliyah spoke for the first time, her voice tight. The coffee shop, the cameras will prove he was there. There was a long, heavy sigh on the other end of the line. I checked that too, kid. I filed the subpoena for the security footage from the corner brew. A pause. They only keep their footage for 30 days. It was automatically purged from their system 2 days ago. It is gone. The air left Aaliyah's lungs. The receipt was nothing. It was just a piece of paper. It was just her word. The email, Tanya whispered, her voice a thin, cracking thread. The email from Silas Thorne. The motive. The prosecutor's office laughed at it, Grant said, his voice sharp and angry. It is circumstantial. It is not illegal for Thorne to want to dissolve his own company. They say it proves nothing. It is just a kid's theory. The silence in the room was absolute. Aaliyah could hear the hiss of the speaker, the sound of an empty, useless line. So, Tanya said, her voice hollow. So we have nothing. We have an alibi with no witness and no proof, Grant corrected her. We have a forgery that a prosecutor will say a loving daughter imagined. We are exactly where we started. No, we are worse off, because now they know we are desperate. He took a deep breath. Aaliyah could hear the sound of him rubbing his face. Listen to me, both of you. I am sorry. The kid, Aaliyah, you did good. You did real detective work. But you hit a brick wall. The system is the brick wall. What do we do? Tanya asked. My advice stands, Grant said, his voice void of all hope. It is the only advice left. Tell Elijah to take the plea. 3 years is better than 10, and I am telling you, with this case, this is how you get 10. The call clicked off. The speakerphone's hiss filled the silence, a static sound of total systemic failure. Tanya Reed did not move for a long, terrible moment. She stared at the cheap plastic phone as if it were a predator that had just killed something she loved. The fragile, dangerous hope that had lived in the apartment for 1 week had not just faded, it had been executed. She slumped her body, folding in on itself, a puppet with its strings cut. She put her head down on the formica table. She was not crying. This was a place beyond tears. It was the cold, gray landscape of total surrender. Aaliyah, watching from the cot, knew this was the moment her aunt had truly given up. Tanya lifted her head. Her eyes were red, but they were no longer sad. They were frantic. 10 years, she whispered, not to Aaliyah, but to the stove, to the walls, to the empty air. He is going to prison for 10 years. He will not take the plea. I know him. He will fight, and he will lose. She turned her gaze on Aaliyah, and it was a look of such raw panic that Aaliyah's stomach clenched. And you, Tanya whispered. What about you? I cannot. I cannot do this alone. I have to do what is right for you, baby. I have to protect you. Aaliyah knew that tone. It was the adults know best tone. It was the tone that came before a terrible decision. Tanya stood up, her movements jerky, robotic. She went to her purse, which hung on the back of a chair. She fumbled inside past old receipts and baby wipes and pulled out a small beige business card, the card Ms. Dawson had given her at the principal's office. Tanya, no. Aaliyah said, her voice a low warning. I have to, Aaliyah. Tanya said, her voice shaking as she punched in the numbers. I have to ask. I have to know what happens. I have to be prepared. She put the phone to her ear. Hello, Ms. Dawson. Yes, this is Tanya Reed, Elijah Reed's sister. I am sorry to call so late. I have an urgent question. About my niece. It took less than an hour. Aaliyah had not moved from the cot. She was a coiled spring, a small still point of vigilance. The knock was quiet, official. Tanya opened the door and Ms. Dawson entered, bringing with her the cold night air and the sterile scent of bureaucracy. She wore the same beige pantsuit. She looked as if she lived in it, a woman made of policies and procedures. Ms. Reed, she said, her voice a flat line. You sounded distressed on the phone. Please, Tanya whispered, her hands twisting together. Come in. Can we talk? In the kitchen. Aaliyah did not move. She did not breathe. She was a shadow in the dim living room, invisible. The two women sat at the small kitchen table, a space of only 4 feet. It was not a private conversation. It was a verdict. His lawyer, Tanya began, her voice a thin breaking thread. He said it is hopeless. He said, Elijah is probably going to get 10 years. When that happens, Aaliyah. She stays with me, right? I am her family. Ms. Dawson placed her identical clipboard on the table. The sound was horribly final. Ms. Reed, Tanya, she said, her voice softening with a practiced procedural empathy. I need to be completely transparent with you. The room felt cold. If Mr. Reed is convicted of a felony of this magnitude, Ms. Dawson continued, and he is incarcerated for a period of 5 years or more, the state will move to terminate his parental rights. Tanya just stared. Terminate? What does that... Permanently, Ms. Dawson clarified, her voice void of emotion. The court's position is that a child needs permanence. Aaliyah would become a ward of the state. We would have to place her in a long-term foster care family, one equipped to handle the trauma. No, Tanya whispered. It was a sound of protest, but it had no strength. No, not foster care. I am her aunt. I am right here. And we appreciate you stepping up, Ms. Dawson said, her voice a gentle, terrible hammer. But a long-term placement requires a determination of the child's best interests, financial stability, adequate housing, emotional resources. The state will make that determination. But I must be clear. A conviction means Mr. Reed will in all likelihood lose his daughter forever. Aaliyah heard every word from the cot. Foster care, terminate, permanently, forever. The cold, hard shield of anger in her chest, the thing that had been her only defense, did not break. It ignited. It became a pure, white-hot fire. This was not about a prison term. This was not about 3 years versus 10. This was an erasure. They were going to erase her father from her life. The lawyer had surrendered. Her aunt had just surrendered. And the system, the beige, polite procedural system, was here to finalize the execution. Ms. Dawson was still talking about resources and support groups. Tanya was just making small, wounded animal sounds. Aaliyah stood up from the cot. Her movement was silent, but it was decisive. She walked to her backpack, which was sitting by the door, a silent witness. She unzipped the main compartment. She walked with steady, deliberate steps into the kitchen. The two women looked up, startled. Aaliyah, baby, no, Tanya started. We were just talking. Aaliyah said nothing. She unzipped the hidden pocket inside her backpack. She took out the pink carbon copy of the forgery. She took out the printed email from Silas Thorne. She took out her school planner open to March 15th. And she took out the small, precious white receipt from the corner brew. She placed them on the table on top of Ms. Dawson's clipboard. The lawyer had failed. Her aunt had failed. The adults were not just useless. They were the enemy. She zipped her backpack shut. She pulled the straps tight on her shoulders. Aaliyah, what are you doing? Tanya cried. Aaliyah looked at Ms. Dawson, at her cold, procedural eyes. You are wrong, Aaliyah said. Her voice was not the voice of a child. It was the voice of a warrior. My father is not going to prison. He is not going to lose me. And I am not going to foster care. She turned, and before Tanya or Mrs. Dawson could react, she opened the apartment door, walked into the hallway, and did not look back. Courtroom 4B was a cathedral built to the god of consequences. It was not a room. It was a weapon designed to make a person feel small. The walls were covered in enormous panels of dark, imposing wood, a reddish-brown mahogany that seemed to have absorbed a century of misery. The wood went all the way up to a high vaulted ceiling, and the air itself was heavy still and smelled of old paper floor wax and the faint sour scent of human anxiety. Aaliyah sat in the third row, a small, rigid figure wedged between two worlds. On her left was Aunt Tanya, who had not stopped crying since they left the apartment. They were not the loud, desperate sobs of that first night. They were the silent, hopeless, leaking tears of a woman attending a funeral. On her right was the aisle, a strip of worn carpet that separated her from the front of the room, from the bar, from the place where the verdict would be delivered. Aaliyah's own body was a traitor. Her heart was not beating. It was hammering a frantic trapped bird inside her ribs, a rhythm so violent she was sure the people around her could hear it. Her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her hoodie were not just damp. They were drenched, her palms slick with a cold, terrifying sweat. Her backpack containing the forgery, the email, the planner, and the precious flimsy receipt was a physical weight on her small lap. She clutched the straps, her knuckles white. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The room, quiet at first, was now filling. Lawyers in sharp suits, black and gray and navy, bustled in their voices, a low, confident murmur. They did not look like they were about to decide a man's life. They looked like they were ordering lunch. One man stood out. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armor. He had a bright, confident smile and was chatting with a police officer. This was D.A. Miles, the prosecutor. He looked rested. He looked successful. He looked, Aaliyah thought, like a man who had never been told no. The side door opened. A deputy stepped out, and behind him a figure. It was not her father. It was a ghost. Elijah Reed was wearing the Navy suit, the one he had worn to the parent-teacher conference, the one he had worn to the meeting with Silas Thorne. But the suit which had once been a symbol of his pride now hung on him. He had lost weight. His skin was a pale, sickly gray, and his shoulders were slumped, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. He was led to the defendant's table. His lawyer, Mr. Grant, put a hand on his shoulder, his face a mask of weary resignation. Elijah sat. He stared at the empty water glass on the table in front of him. He did not look for Aaliyah. He did not scan the gallery. He did not turn his head. He was so consumed by his own shame, so utterly defeated that he could not even bear to see who was there to watch him fall. He will not even look at me, Aaliyah thought, and the thought was a fresh stab of pain. A door at the front of the room opened. "All rise!" A bailiff shouted, his voice a sharp crack in the heavy air. Everyone stood. A woman entered from the side chamber, moving with a slow, deliberate grace, her black robe flowing behind her. She was tall, a black woman in her early 60s, her hair a crown of silver gray. She did not smile. She did not look at the lawyers. She simply moved to the high bench, the fortress of wood, at the front of the room, and sat. This was Judge Lena Porter. The room sat a collective rustle. Judge Porter looked out over the courtroom. Her eyes, Aaliyah saw, were not just stern. They were sharp. They were intelligent. They were the eyes of a person who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. Aaliyah's terror suddenly focused. The room, the lawyers, the weeping aunt, all of it faded. There was only the judge and her father. She looked at Elijah's slumped, defeated back. She saw the proud man who had made her pancakes. She saw the father who had held her hand while she learned to read. She saw the man who had worked 14-hour days, the man who had been so proud, the man who had been betrayed. The fear in her chest, the cold, sweating panic did not disappear, but the fire, the white-hot, righteous anger burned brighter. "You have to fight for him," she told herself, her grip on the backpack strap so tight it hurt. "He always fought for you. It is your turn. It is your turn to fight." Judge Lena Porter's voice was a deep, resonant alto, a sound that carried the full weight of the state. It filled the cavernous, wood-paneled room, silencing the last of the nervous coughs and rustles. "We are here today," she began, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom, "in the matter of the state versus Elijah Reed, case number 7749. The defendant is charged with 1 count of felony embezzlement and 1 count of fraud in the amount of $50,000. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the prosecutor. "Mr. Miles, are there any preliminary matters before the prosecution begins its opening statement?" D.A. Miles, tall, confident, and armored in his perfect suit, began to rise. "No, Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed." "Your Honor." The voice was not Mr. Miles. It was not Judge Porter. It was high clear and did not belong. It cut through the heavy formal air like a shard of glass. Every head in the courtroom swiveled. The sound the disturbance had come from the third row. Aaliyah Reed was on her feet. She was standing alone, small and rigid in the sea of seated spectators. The courtroom for a split second was frozen in disbelief. Then the chaos erupted. "Aaliyah!" Aunt Tanya's voice was a choked, horrified hiss. She grabbed Aaliyah's arm, her fingers digging in like claws. "No! Sit down! Oh my God, Aaliyah, sit down now!" At the prosecution table, D.A. Miles stopped his mouth open. He sighed a sound of profound, weary annoyance. He looked up at the ceiling as if asking a higher power for patience. At the defense table, Mr. Grant looked like he had been struck by lightning. His face, already a mask of weary resignation, drained of all color. He half rose his hands, fluttering, "No, no, no, Your Honor." And Elijah, who had not moved, who had been a statue of shame, snapped his head around. His eyes hollow and dead found his daughter. They widened, not with hope, but with a fresh, agonizing terror. "No!" He whispered a sound no one but the guard next to him could hear. "Aaliyah, no. Please sit down." Judge Porter's eyes, those sharp assessing instruments of the law, locked onto the small figure. Her face hardened. "Child," she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it was absolute. It was a hammer. "You will sit down. This is a court of law. This is not a playground." "Bailiff." A large deputy at the side of the room put his hand on his belt and began to move toward the aisle. "My name is Aaliyah Reed." Aaliyah's voice shook, but it was not a whisper. She took one step into the aisle, pulling her arm free from Tanya's desperate grasp. She was still wearing her backpack. "Child, I am warning you," Judge Porter said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "That man is my father." Aaliyah continued, her voice gaining strength. Her small, trembling hand rose, and she pointed not at her father, but for him at the defendant's table. "Elijah Reed. He is innocent." A wave of murmurs of gasps swept the room. D.A. Miles shot to his feet. "Objection!" he boomed, his voice dripping with outrage. "Your Honor, this is an absolute mockery. This is a circus." Aaliyah did not waver. She looked past the prosecutor, past the guards, past everyone. She looked directly at Judge Lena Porter. "And I have proof." The room exploded. D.A. Miles was shouting, "Your Honor, this is an obvious pathetic stunt by the defense. I ask that the child be removed immediately and the gallery be held in contempt." "Order!" Judge Porter's gavel cracked down the sound like a gunshot. The room, shocked, fell silent. She glared at D.A. Miles. Then her gaze, heavy and critical, fell back on Aaliyah. Judge Porter despised chaos. She had been on the bench for 30 years. She had seen every lie, every performance, every desperate theatrical plea. She hated disruptions to the sanctity of her procedure. She was about to have the girl removed, but she looked. The girl was 11, maybe 12. She was terrified. Her small body was trembling so hard it was visible from the bench. But she was not crying. She was not hysterical. Her eyes. Judge Porter's gaze narrowed. The girl's eyes were not the eyes of a child having a tantrum. They were focused. They were intelligent. They were burning with a cold, terrifying adult steel. Judge Porter's gaze flicked to the defense table. "Mr. Grant," she snapped. "Do you know anything about this?" Mr. Grant was as white as the legal pad in front of him. He was shaking his head, stammering, "No, Your Honor, on my word. I had no idea. Aaliyah, please sit down. We talked about—" The judge held up a hand, silencing him. So she processed. It was not a stunt. The lawyer was just as blindsided as the prosecutor. This was not a plan. This was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. The child was acting alone. Judge Porter leaned forward, her robes rustling. "Order," she said again, though the room was already silent. She fixed her gaze on D.A. Miles. "Mr. Miles, your objection is noted for the record. Sit down." She then turned her full, undivided, and formidable attention to the small girl standing alone in the aisle. "Young lady," she said, her voice low, "this is my courtroom. The rules of procedure are my domain, and I will not have them turned into a farce." The entire room held its breath. "However," Judge Porter continued, her voice a precise surgical instrument, "I have also been doing this job for 30 years, and I have learned that sometimes truth appears in very unusual containers." She leaned further over the bench, a queen looking down at a petitioner. "You have 5 minutes," she said. 5 minutes to convince me that you are not, as Mr. Miles says, a mockery." Tanya let out a small, strangled sob. Elijah looked like he was going to be sick. "Bailiff, hold your position," Judge Porter commanded. She pointed a single long finger at Aaliyah. "Approach the bench, now." The bailiff, a large man with a weary face, looked at Judge Porter. Judge Porter gave a single, sharp nod. "Ma'am, please step forward," the bailiff said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He led her to the witness stand, the large wooden fortress next to the judge's bench. It was built for adults, a throne of dark, intimidating wood. Aaliyah had to put her hands on the seat and hoist herself up. Her feet in their worn sneakers dangled a full foot above the floor. She was a child on a throne looking out over a silent, hostile kingdom. She slid the backpack off her shoulders and placed it on her lap. "Please raise your right hand," the bailiff said. Aaliyah raised her hand. It was trembling. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," she whispered. "Please state your name for the record." Aaliyah Reed." Judge Porter leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Mr. Grant, do you wish to question your witness?" Mr. Grant, still pale, looked up, his mouth opening and closing. He was in shock. He was useless. "Very well," Judge Porter said, her voice laced with an icy impatience. "I will handle this. Ms. Reed." The title change was electric. Aaliyah sat up straighter. "You said you have proof," Judge Porter said. "What is in the backpack?" "My father's life," Aaliyah said. She unzipped the main compartment. The entire courtroom watched. D.A. Miles was on his feet, ready to object. Silas Thorne in the front row watched with a look of bored curiosity. Elijah had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "First," Aaliyah said, her voice shaking but clear through the microphone. She pulled out the pink carbon copy. "The signature." A bailiff took the paper and handed it to Judge Porter, who put on a pair of reading glasses. "That is the paper they say my father signed to steal the $50,000, Aaliyah said, "but he did not. It is a forgery." D.A. Miles exploded. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an absolute farce. The child is not a certified handwriting expert. She has no foundation. Her opinion is less than meaningless." Judge Porter held up the pink slip, her eyes scanning it. She looked over her glasses at D.A. Miles. "Mr. Miles, she is not a certified expert. She is, however, a witness who has presumably seen the defendant's signature for her entire life. That gives her a foundation of intimate knowledge that, frankly, an expert for hire might lack." Her gaze was a flat wall. "Objection overruled. Sit down." The courtroom rustled. Aaliyah took a breath. "I know his signature," she said, her voice stronger. "I have seen it on every report card, on every permission slip, on my birthday cards, and that is not it. Look." She was speaking to Judge Porter now. "The E in Elijah. My dad's E is sharp. It is one fast line with a hook. That E is loopy. It is slow, and the R in Reed. My dad's R is angular like a roof and a leg. That one is soft like a pea that got scared." She was right. The forgery under this sudden intense scrutiny looked clumsy. "Second," Aaliyah said. She reached back into the bag. This time she pulled out the printed email. "The motive." The bailiff delivered the email. Silas Thorne in the front row stopped, looking curious. He tensed his hand, going to his expensive silk tie. "That is an email," Aaliyah said, "from Mr. Silas Thorne. He is sitting right there. He is the man who accused my father." The entire courtroom turned to look at Silas, who was suddenly visibly uncomfortable. "The email is dated February 20th. That is 3 weeks before the money was stolen. It is to my father. It says, and I quote, 'I am going to need my initial investment back soon. Let us discuss how to dissolve the business properly.'" "Objection, D.A." Miles shouted, his face turning red. "This is rank speculation. It proves nothing." "Sustained," Judge Porter said, but her eyes were fixed on the email. "Stick to the facts, Ms. Reed." "The fact," Aaliyah said, her voice sharp, "is that Mr. Thorne wanted his money back before he said my dad stole it. And third," she said. She was not done. Her hands, no longer shaking, went back into the backpack. She pulled out her school planner. She pulled out the small, flimsy white receipt. "The alibi," she said. This time the room was silent. Even Miles was quiet, a look of dawning horror on his face. "The paper, the forgery," Aaliyah said. "It says my father stole the money on March 15th. At 2:30 in the afternoon, she held up the planner. This is my school planner. You can see the date. March 15th. I wrote it myself. Parent-teacher conference. Ms. Boyd. 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. My father was with me. In my classroom. At my school. A collective gasp went through the room. It was the sound of 100 people sucking in their breath at once. Elijah was staring at his daughter, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face. Mr. Grant looked like he had seen a ghost. "And I know what you will say," Aaliyah continued, her voice ringing with a cold, righteous fury. "You will say I am a kid. You will say I lied. You will say I just wrote that in my planner to save him." She held up the small white receipt. It looked impossibly small in her hand. "This," she said, "is his credit card receipt from the Corner Brew. It is 1 block away from my school. He bought me a hot chocolate because I got an A+. The bailiff took the receipt and handed it to the judge, who stared at it. "It is dated March 15th, Aaliyah said. "At 2:47 p.m., 15 minutes after he was supposedly across town at a bank stealing $50,000. The bank is in downtown. My school is in uptown. It is a 30-minute drive." She had nothing left in her bag. She put her hands on the wooden rail of the witness box. "My father did not steal that money," she said, her voice clear and echoing in the dead silent room. "He could not have. He was with me. No one can be in 2 places at once." The silence that followed was not quiet. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of an entire case, an entire worldview evaporating. D.A. Miles stood frozen, his face a pale, sickly white. His confidence was shattered, his case in ruins. And in the front row, Silas Thorne, the man in the expensive suit, the man who had been so bored, was no longer watching. He was staring at the floor. And a single dark bead of sweat had detached from his hairline and was rolling slowly down the side of his temple. D.A. Miles, the prosecutor, finally found his voice. It was not the smooth, confident boom of an hour ago. It was a strained, desperate rasp, high and tight in his throat. "Your Honor," he said, scrambling to his feet, his face a blotchy, uneven red. "Your Honor, this is an absolute orchestrated circus. It proves nothing." He began to pace a jerky, uncontrolled motion, trying to regain the authority that had evaporated from him. "A school planner, a coffee shop receipt. This is the very definition of circumstantial, inadmissible evidence. This is the word of a desperate 11-year-old child who is obviously and quite frankly lying to save her father." He tried to look sympathetic, a performance of reason. "It is touching, Your Honor. It is tragic. But it is not evidence. It is a fairy tale. I demand this entire testimony, be stricken from the record, and I move that we proceed." "Her words are the truth." The voice was not Aaliyah's. It was not the judge's. It was a new voice, a woman's voice, clear and strong, cutting through the heavy air from the back of the courtroom. Every head swiveled. The bailiff, the judge, Elijah, Aaliyah. The heavy main doors of the courtroom were open, and standing in the threshold was Ms. Boyd. She was in her teaching clothes, a simple yellow blouse and a gray skirt. She looked terrified, her knuckles white as she clutched a large spiral-bound book to her chest. She was visibly shaking. "Objection!" Miles screamed. His voice was no longer a rasp, it was a shriek. "Your Honor, I will not stand for this. This is an ambush. This is a mockery of procedure. This person has not been subpoenaed. This is completely improper. Remove her." Crack. Judge Porter's gavel was a gunshot. "Silence, Mr. Miles," she commanded, her voice a whip of ice. "You will be silent." She stared at the back of the room at the new witness. "Bailiff, you will hold your position." "Ma'am," Judge Porter called out, her voice echoing in the now deadly silent room, "you will approach the bench." Ms. Boyd walked the long, terrible aisle. Her heels clicked on the marble floor. She looked small, a single bird in a vast wooden sky. She was sworn in her hand, trembling so badly she could barely keep it raised. "State your name," Judge Porter said. "Gabrielle Boyd," she said, her voice a little breathless. I am Aaliyah Reed's science teacher." "And what are you doing here, Ms. Boyd?" Judge Porter asked, her voice low. "I am here," Ms. Boyd began, her eyes finding Aaliyah. "I am here against the express written orders of my superiors." "Objection." Miles tried again, his voice weak. "She is admitting she has no right to be here." "Overruled." Judge Porter snapped, not even looking at him. "Continue, Ms. Boyd." "The district's legal department." Ms. Boyd said the words, a difficult practiced rush. They told me it was against policy. They told me I was forbidden to get involved in a parent's criminal case. They told me I was not to speak to any lawyers or to the court. They implied my job was at risk. Then why are you here? Judge Porter asked, her voice softening just a fraction. Because I cannot, Ms. Boyd said, her voice breaking, but she held it. I cannot sit in my classroom under a poster that says integrity while I let a child's proven logical alibi be dismissed as a lie. I will not. The courtroom was so quiet, Aaliyah could hear her own heart beating. Her words are the truth, Ms. Boyd said, her voice finally ringing clear. The school planner is correct. I was there. Mr. Elijah Reed. She pointed to him, and Elijah looked up. His face, a mask of disbelief, was in my classroom with Aaliyah for a parent-teacher conference on Tuesday, March 15th. And you are certain of the date? Judge Porter asked. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Boyd lifted the heavy book she was carrying. Because this is not a memory. This is my official school attendance register and my parent meeting log. It is not a copy. It is the original. I took it from the office this morning. She opened it, her shaking fingers finding the page. March 15th, 2 p.m., Reed, Elijah, and Aaliyah. The meeting lasted until 3 o'clock. This was the finishing blow. A child's planner could be a lie. A receipt could be a coincidence. But this was an official document presented by a teacher who was maxing a career-ending sacrifice to confirm it. D.A. Miles did not object. He had no objection left. He simply slowly sank into his chair. Judge Lena Porter let the teacher's words hang in the suffocating silence. She looked at the teacher's logbook, now entered into evidence. She looked at the coffee shop receipt. She looked at the school planner. She looked at the forged signature on the pink slip. The case, which had been a simple, sad, and straightforward conviction, had just been methodically disemboweled by an 11-year-old girl. Judge Porter slowly, deliberately turned her gaze from the evidence. She looked past the witness stand, past the defense table, and settled her full, formidable attention on the prosecutor. Mr. Miles, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, you are looking at a receipt. You are looking at a certified school register. You are looking at a teacher who is risking her career to testify to an alibi. In light of this, do you wish to reconsider your case against Mr. Reed? D.A. Miles was a statue of humiliation. His face was a waxy pale color. His hands, which had been so confident, were now shoved deep in his pockets. He had built his entire prosecution on the word of one man, and that man was a liar. Your Honor, Miles stammered, his voice weak. The state would ask for a recess to reevaluate these new... Denied, Judge Porter snapped. We will not be reevaluating. We will be concluding. You have built a case against a man who was at the exact time of the crime in a parent-teacher conference. You have failed, Mr. Miles. You have failed this court, and you have failed the public. She turned her gaze to the front row. Mr. Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne flinched as if he had been struck. Bailiff, Judge Porter commanded, you will escort Mr. Thorne to the witness stand. He will be sworn in. Your Honor, Miles tried weakly, the state is not calling Mr. Thorne. I am, Judge Porter said. This court is calling him. Get on the stand, Mr. Thorne. Silas Thorne's walk to the stand was the end of his life. He tried to maintain the performance. He smoothed his expensive suit jacket. He adjusted his silk tie. He tried to project the same aura of bored, untouchable wealth, but it was a grotesque mask. His face was slick with a thin sheen of sweat. His movements were jerky, robotic. He was sworn in. He sat in the chair that Aaliyah had just occupied. It seemed to shrink him. Judge Porter leaned forward, her eyes like black polished stones. Mr. Thorne, you are the accuser in this case. You are the man who claimed $50,000 was stolen by the defendant, Elijah Reed. Yes, Your Honor, Silas said. His voice was too high, a thin, reedy sound. Then you must have been very surprised, Judge Porter continued, to hear that at the exact moment of the theft, Mr. Reed was across town in a classroom. Silas forced a laugh. It was a horrible, dry, clicking sound. Your Honor, I am as surprised as you. Clearly the child is lying. It is a lovely, touching story. She is a devoted daughter, and the teacher, Ms. Boyd. I seem to recall Elijah mentioning she was an admirer of his. I am sure she is just confused or lying for him as well. It was a fatal miscalculation. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew it. He saw the flash of pure cold fire in Judge Porter's eyes, but his mind was no longer working. It was a frantic mess of panicked thoughts. How? How did she find it? That stupid sentimental receipt. The email. How did she find the email? That little girl and the teacher. She was supposed to be silenced. The district lawyers promised. She was not supposed to be here. This was not the plan. The plan was clean. Judge Porter's voice sliced through his internal panic. Mr. Thorne, I am going to remind you of two things. First, you are in a court of law under oath. The penalty for perjury for lying to this court is a prison sentence, a long one. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, of course, Silas stammered. Second, Judge Porter said. She paused. She did not raise her voice. She lowered it. I am going to ask you to look at that child. Silas froze. Turn your head, Mr. Thorne, and look at her. Slowly, reluctantly, as if his neck were made of stone, Silas Thorne turned his head. He looked at the witness stand where Aaliyah Reed was still sitting, waiting to be dismissed. She was not crying. She was not angry. She was just watching him. Her eyes were not the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of a scientist who had just solved a complex problem. They were the eyes of truth. She knew, and he knew that she knew. That look, that simple 11-year-old knowing gaze shattered his entire world. The expensive suit, the alligator shoes, the Patek watch. It was all a costume, and she had just pulled it off. Mr. Thorne, Judge Porter said, her voice a final surgical blade. I am going to ask you one more time. Did you forge Elijah Reed's signature on that withdrawal form? Silas stared at Aaliyah. The courtroom, the judge, the lawyers, all of it faded. There was only this small girl who had taken him apart piece by piece with a school planner and a coffee receipt. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Silas Thorne's perfect mask of wealth, his confident, practiced smile finally cracked. It broke. His shoulders, so straight and proud, began to shake. He ripped at his tie as if it were choking him. He put his face in his hands. Stop, he whispered. The microphone picked it up. Please, just stop. The courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouts, the sound of reporters scrambling. Crack, crack, crack. Judge Porter hammered the gavel, her face a mask of thunder. Order, order in this court. The room slowly, agonizingly fell quiet. Silas Thorne lifted his head. He was weeping, not tears of regret. They were the hot, angry, humiliating tears of a man who had been caught. Yes, he said, his voice a broken public wreck. Yes, it was me. I took the money. Elijah Reed let out a sound, a sob that had been held in for months, a sound of such profound, agonizing relief that it echoed in the room. I forged his signature. Silas continued the confession, now a torrent. I set him up. I framed him. All of it. Why? Judge Porter demanded, her voice cold as ice. I was in debt. Silas confessed, his words tumbling out, the ugly truth finally exposed. Gambling debts. Bad investments. I owed dangerous people a lot of money. He looked at Elijah, his eyes desperate. I needed the $50,000 back, but I could not just take it. They would have known. I needed a story. I needed a fall guy. He pointed a shaking finger at Elijah. He was perfect. The new partner. The trusting, naive accountant. I could frame him, take the money, and then I could tell my creditors the money was gone, stolen. It would buy me time. I could even sue him for damages. It was the only way. The confession hung in the air, a poisonous, stinking thing exposed to the light by an 11-year-old girl. The courtroom detonated. It was not a murmur. It was a roar. People leaped to their feet. Reporters, their faces masks of stunned adrenaline, were shouting into their phones. D.A. Miles had physically collapsed into his chair. A man hollowed out his entire case, his entire reputation incinerated in 90 seconds. Crack, crack, crack. Judge Porter's gavel was a weapon firing into the chaos. Order, she bellowed. Order in my courtroom, bailiff! Her command was unnecessary. The two deputies who had been standing by the wall, the same two officers who had invaded Elijah's home, were already moving. They converged on the witness stand on the small, weeping, pathetic figure of Silas Thorne. Silas Thorne. Judge Porter's voice was cold iron, a voice that delivered consequences. You are under arrest for perjury, felony, fraud, and grand theft by embezzlement. You will be taken into custody immediately. No, wait. Silas whimpered, his hands up. I was under duress. The performance was over. The deputies grabbed him by his expensive suit, pulling him to his feet. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs was the second loudest sound in the room. It was the sound that had begun this nightmare, and now it was the sound of justice. Judge Porter watched the bailiffs lead the broken man away. She turned her cold, furious gaze on the prosecutor. Mr. Miles, your case is dismissed. She then turned her attention, her entire formidable focus, to the defense table. Her expression for the first time softened. It was not kindness. It was a profound, weary respect. All charges against Mr. Elijah Reed are hereby and immediately dismissed. She declared, her voice ringing in the now silent room. This case is expunged. Mr. Reed, you are a free man. She lifted her gavel. Crack. You are free to go, she said. And this court apologizes for the injustice you have suffered. The room exploded again. But this time it was not a roar of chaos. It was applause. It was cheering. People were standing clapping for the small girl on the witness stand. Elijah Reed did not move. He sat at the table, his body shaking, staring at his own hands, which were still cuffed in front of him. He was processing the words. Free to go. The deputy who had arrested him walked over, a new, strange expression on his face. He held a small key. A click. The steel handcuffs, the symbol of his shame, fell away. They landed on the table with a heavy, final thud. Dad! The cry came from the witness box. Aaliyah scrambled down from the high chair. She did not use the steps. She half jumped, half fell, her sneakers hitting the marble floor. She ran. She did not walk. She ran past the stunned lawyers, past the bar, into the sacred space of the court. Aaliyah. Elijah's voice was a raw, broken whisper. He stood, his legs unsteady, and turned. His arms, his hands finally mercifully free, opened wide. She crashed into him. Aaliyah wrapped her arms around his waist, so hard it hurt, burying her face in the wrinkled fabric of his suit. Elijah fell to his knees, his own arms encircling her, pulling her against his chest as if he could absorb her. He held the back of her head, his face buried in her hair, and he began to sob. It was not the silent, broken weeping of the jail. It was a lifetime of terror, of shame, of injustice pouring out of him in great, gasping wails. You saved me, he cried, his voice muffled in her hair. You did it. You saved me. Oh, Aaliyah, my baby girl, my brave girl, my brave, brave girl. You saved your dad. Aaliyah was crying, two hot, unstoppable tears of pure, absolute relief. The cold, hard, white-hot fire that had held her spine straight for weeks finally dissolved, washed away in the flood. I knew it, she sobbed, her words thick, clinging to him. I knew you didn't do it. I told them. I knew you would never. I love you, Dad. I love you so much. I love you more than my life star, he whispered, holding her. More than anything in this world. They stayed there, a father and daughter, kneeling on the floor of courtroom 4B, rebuilding their world in a single embrace. Aunt Tanya ran up her face, a ruin of tears and makeup, her arms wrapping around both of them, muttering, Oh God, Elijah, I am so sorry I believed them. I am so sorry. From the aisle, Ms. Boyd watched tears streaming down her own face, but she was smiling. Judge Lena Porter stood. She looked down at the scene, at the family healing itself on her courtroom floor. Her stern, judicial mask softened. She nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of profound respect. This court, she said, her voice quiet but firm, is adjourned. Truth is silent until someone has the courage to speak for it. This story shows that systems and experts can fail, but conviction when armed with evidence is a powerful force. Even the smallest voice can expose a lie and achieve true justice.